Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside you find 2022's first Anselm Pub Night. And really, I think the first pub night we have had since pre-COVID times. What these pub nights are is that they're just local gatherings of Anselm folks, friends of Anselm folks, well-wishers of Anselm. We get together, we meet up with our friends, have some drinks and snacks, and tell a story and learn something. So this one that you're going to hear is the audio from our March pub night. And as you can imagine, it is St. Patrick's Day themed. And for the main event, our very own Evangeline Denmark, who is an Anselm writer and co-host of this show, retold the story of St. Brigid's Cloak. So you're going to hear that, and then you're going to hear Evangeline and me talk a little bit about the story of St. Brigid, the story of, sort of mythos in Ireland and what that means. And it was a really fun conversation. So this was recorded live in front of all the folks at the pub night. So you're going to hear some of all the stuff that goes along with the live performance. You'll hear the laughter, the live flubs, all of that. So it should be really fun, and I think you will really enjoy it. So with no further ado, here is me introducing Evangeline Denmark at the March Pub Night for the Anselm Society. All right, well, good night, everybody. Good night. That sounds like I'm saying goodbye. Anyway, hello. I want to start off with a G.K. Chesterton quote that I remember about 3/4 of. Blah, 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 Irish, the people God made mad, for all their wars are happy and all their songs are sad. And that 3/4 sentiment is exactly what me and Evangeline hope to bring to this tonight. Well, especially Evangeline, because she did all the work of writing the story, but
only 3/4 of it.
Only 3/4 of it. So what we're going to do is Evangeline is going to read her story, which is a retelling of St. Brigid's Cloak. And after that, we're going to have a little discussion about it, some of the themes, some of the broader stuff about Brigid and Ireland and myths and all this other stuff. And after that is done, I believe, I don't have my notes in front of me, I should, we go over to the music for a bit.
Actually, we're going to take a break.
Then we take a break. A food break.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then come back for songs.
Oh, okay. I already got plenty of food, but I will get more, and then we will come back for games and songs after that. All right, so without any further ado, I will officially introduce Evangeline Denmark, one of our Anselm Arts Guild members. She is a writer. She is also on our podcast. She has a deep knowledge of Irish mythology. You do, come on.
3/4 deep.
3/4 deep knowledge of Irish mythology, and I think this will be great. So here we go. Evangeline Denmark, St. Brigid's Cloak.
All right, this is Brigid's Cloak. Our story begins at the edge of history, where myth and fact bleed into one another, where the wild ways of knowing are shaped by new creeds, and the people see in the sacred cycles the hand that spun them into motion. But there are still some who gather in moonlit groves to worship in the old ways. Still some who sacrifice against scarcity and dread the wrath of fickle deities. For one blighted crop, one harsh winter, or one spreading sickness can spell ruin for all. It is hard to be a king in such times. Hard to know whom to trust when the world is shifting and power does not always belong to the strongest. Crimthan Mackinac, King of Leinster, could take no chances. He should have known better all those years ago when Brigid, no bigger than a green rush, upended his household in the span of an afternoon. Her father, a haggard chieftain looking to escape his wife's anger, stood before the king, half-heartedly negotiating a bride price for his bastard daughter. While they bartered, Brigid eluded her watchers, found her way to the weapon stock, selected the king's own jeweled sword, and gave it away to a beggar. He would have thought her a liar had the sword not been found in the beggar's procession. He would have thought her mad had her gentle explanation not stilled the disquiet in him. Even so, he did not need such a wife as this. He paid her father off, gave the girl her freedom, and provided a position for her in the dairy, where accounts of miraculously replenishing butter and milk stores delighted the young and unsettled the old. Such plenty never came without a price, and any household accident or injury was offered as proof. The same Brigid stood before him now, quiet, uncanny, cloak drawn around her small frame. "I came to receive the gift of land," she said. Crimson stifled a groan. "As I told you, I have no land to bestow, no laborers to spare, and no gold to give other gods. You'll have to build your convent elsewhere." She tilted her head. Fiery light from the setting sun stole through the door, overlaying her threadbare cloak she wore with a glowing mantle. All these things, land, labor, wealth, have already been given us for the glory of God and the care of his people. "And what of my people?" Crimson replied. "My duty is to them and the glory of Leinster." "Good sister, if you already possess these riches, why come to me with your demands?" She met his gaze. "So that you might see, and so that you too might be blessed." Brigid turned to go, the rays of the sun reaching for her like a groom for his bride. But she drew up. Again she cocked her head, almost as if she heard a sound the king could not. "If you have not land for a convent, then will you give me as much land as my cloak can cover? Grant me this, and neither I nor any of my sisters will trouble you again." The king should have known better. He should have laughed at her strange request and sent her away. But he didn't feel like laughing. He felt as he did on long rides beneath the stars, or at the cliff's edge with the sea crashing beneath. With goosebumps raised and innards wobbling, he said, "Very well, Brigid, I will give you the land your cloak covers." Long after the holy woman left, Crimson remained alone in the gathering shadows, wondering what would come from his hasty promise. When Brigid returned, Crimson went out to meet her. Though he'd told no one of their agreement, somehow the whole kingdom seemed to know about it. Everyone, from warriors down to toddlers, gathered at the ridge of Dumcraith. Brigid waited beneath the sheltering branches of an oak tree. The sun had set, and the whole land lingered on a threshold, tipping ever so slowly into purple-edged night. A murmur brushed over the crowd as white-robed figures joined the onlookers. The Druids had come to see the outcome of the king's foolish bargain. There was no getting around it. So Crimson raised his head and strode toward the waiting woman. Brigid's bright eyes sparkled in a face softened by years and a care. And again, Crimson thought of that day many years ago. What if he had married Brigid? Would he be in less trouble than he was now? Or more? "You will keep your promise?" she asked. Crimson nodded. "All the land your cloak covers, good lady." She smiled and removed the meager cloth from her shoulders, shaking it out with a degree of ceremony that set the crowd tittering. Crimson flushed. Why had he not just given the woman a parcel of land and been done with it? The laughter died away as all attention centered on Brigid. The king expected a trick. Any moment she would begin to unravel the threads of her cloak, or perhaps shred it into scraps and toss them to the wind. But she did neither of those things. Instead, she turned toward the fertile valley that stretched from the wooded slope to the shores of the lake and murmured, "The trees will provide wood and berries, the lake water and fish, the land crops to feed hungry souls." Crimson blinked. He swallowed. His mouth felt suddenly dry. He looked from Brigid to the valley and back to Brigid. "What?" She clenched the folds of her cloak, smiled at him, and said in that calm, certain voice, "So that you will see." Then she flung her cloak into the air. For an instant, the scrap of ordinary fabric floated before the king's face. Then the cloth began to stretch and stretch, growing thin and fine as a babe's blanket. It grew and grew, unfurling above them like the folds of a great tent. Brigid clung to one corner as the miraculously expanding cloak drifted upward and outward, increasing in every direction. The wind caught it like a sail, sending it billowing up into the dome of the night sky. The mantle was now transparent and shimmery as a dragonfly's wing. Behind it, the stars blurred into orbs of wavering light. Crimson thought he saw bright figures moving among the stars. He thought if he looked long enough, he would see all the way back to the time when his people came to these shores, and beyond to the land they left behind, and even further to mysteries he could not put into words. He thought he could never tear his eyes from the visions behind the veil. But the gasps and cries of his people drew him back to earth. Everywhere, slack jaws and frantic gestures signaled awe. Far down the slope of the hill, tall shapes glided from the forest canopy to gaze at the heavens above. Their forms looked human, and yet they were not at all human. Whispers of Tuatha De Danann rose around him, and the hair on Crimson's arms and back of his neck prickled. The others had come to witness this miracle. Laughter and squeals carried from a nearby garden where a cluster of children watched as tiny creatures on two legs scurried from beneath cabbage leaves, only to disappear in the tall grass. Astonishment turned to joy all around, and Crimson felt the change deep within himself. All these things have been given, Brigid had said. They have already been given for the glory of God and the care of his people. Crimson had no land of his own, not even a patch big enough to spread a cloak over. And yet he'd been given all of this, as Brigid had been given all of it, as his people had been given it. Brigid's wondrous cloak began to drift downward, bringing with it a crackling energy and wind that whipped the waves into whitecaps. The people stilled as the mantle drew nearer and nearer, all eyes watching the slow descent. Just before the gossamer cloth reached his head, Crimson closed his eyes. It settled on him, feather light at first, then with the weight of a fine robe. His skin buzzed with a strange warmth that traveled deeper and deeper until his bones hummed. In time, he opened his eyes to find Brigid's cloak had vanished and the world as it was before. Well, almost. If he concentrated, he could still feel the whisper-soft touch of the mantle against his skin. The people made their way back to the village, to their homes and hearths, and many to the inns and taverns. Brigid stood, holding a glowing candle he did not remember her having before. He opened his mouth to ask where the flame had come from, but she spoke first. "We will begin work on the convent tomorrow." Crimson nodded. "You will have everything you need, Sister Brigid." "Indeed, I will," she replied. "Now come, I will buy you a pint. You've seen much this evening." The king's smile was short-lived. "Good lady, I'm afraid we've a shortage of beer in the village." The light from Brigid's flame twinkled in her eyes. "Not to worry, Crimson Mackinac. Wait till you see what I can do with only a cup of water."
All right. So now we're going to transition from the storytelling set to the interview set, and Evangeline's moving her chair up, and now the set is complete. Ta-da! All right. Well, thank you so much. That was so great. Yeah, and I was expecting a long time. That was great. I think you hit on a lot of the themes we were discussing about this, and it just made my questions a lot easier, so thank you. So first question, let's start with Brigid herself. So the Irish have kind of three big-time saints, like the A-level saints. There's St. Patrick, there's St. Columba, and St. Brigid. Patrick and Columba, it kind of makes sense why they're both so important, because they were like the apostles who brought the faith to the lands. You know, it makes sense. But Brigid wasn't that situation. She was in a different situation. So why Brigid, and why do you think she's been so compelling to so many people for so long?
There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. One of the things I like most about Brigid is that she spans that transition between pagan mythology and the Christian faith in a way that I think you find in other, cultures and other stories, this sort of saint that kind of has this altar life as a pagan goddess, maybe. And we kind of talked about, is Brigid real? Is she not real? Regardless, she captures the imagination of people because there are so many things that she is associated with: poetry, learning, healing, brewing.
Yeah, she's a brewer.
She's a brewer. Dairy, I mean, nowadays we're like, why would you need a saint of the dairy? You know, we were talking, before about how the religion of ancient times is so connected with life and survival. And so I think Brigid then and now connects with our very deep needs for health, for food, for safety.
That leads to the first point I wanted to address, and that is the historicity of Brigid or whatever, because another way that Brigid is unlike, Patrick and Columba is we are quite sure that Patrick existed.
Tell them why Columba's credentials for definitely being
Thank
real.
you for setting that up for me. I was afraid
Well, I'm pretty sure
great.
that next St. Patrick's Day, you need to do the Legend of Columba and...
So, and on one of his missionary trips, St. Columba with a group of his followers, they're going up into Scotland. And they come up to this river that flows into Loch Ness. Okay. Keep that in the back of your heads. And there's this river going in, the River Ness. And as they're approaching the river, they hear the sound. And it's a little peasant and saying, oh no, the guys, that my brother was swimming in the river and some horrible creature attacked him. And St. Columba turns to one of his assistants, like the intern, I guess, and says, hey, go into the water and see what's going on. So the intern goes into the water.
Interns.
Yeah, and goes, and as he's going, there's this huge monster coming from the area of Loch Ness, and it's charging the intern, but luckily St. Columba is there, and he rebukes the beastie, and the monster turns around, and the day is saved. This is history's first recorded sighting of the Loch Ness Monster.
This is important.
This is very important, so thank you. But let's see. Brigid. So Brigid, the sources we have from her come hundreds of years after she was gone, and they're very sparse, and they're clearly in this sort of hagiographic, legendary formula. So there's been some speculation that instead of just the saint, there's an Irish goddess named Brigid who was conveniently in charge of many of the same things, brewery, steel making, dairy, all that stuff. So it's very melded together and it's very hard to disentangle. But I believe you would say that all the nerds worrying about the historicity of Brigid are kind of missing the point.
Yes, I would agree. The way that I look at hagiography and the story of saints is very similar to our Marvel stories today. Nobody thinks that Captain America is real, but oh dear, hearts have been broken. But we could all agree that the ideals that Captain America represents are real. And I think that that's a clue into how we look at Brigid. Did she exist? Did she not exist? That isn't the right question. The question is, what does she represent? What did she represent for the people who were familiar with both the pagan goddess and the saint?
Yeah, and you really capture that in your story with this idea of Brigid being sort of a bridge between the pagan past and Christianity, which at Brigid's time was just being introduced.
Right.
It hadn't fully taken hold, and the king in this story was still a pagan when the story took place. And you kind of incorporate the Tuatha De Danann, you have a lot of different old Irish in there mixed in. So what led to your decision to make it kind of this mix instead of a 100% hagiography?
Right, or even I think the temptation is to rebuke the old ways, especially, within Christian tradition. There's this pagan must be bad. But when we understand pagan to be, people trying to understand their world, trying to survive, trying to understand how forces outside of their control affect them, then, it brings a sort of a personal element, and we're no longer, oh, that's bad. We're like, oh, that's just people. Just people existing. So I like to bring in those other elements to show that they can be part of the bigger story. They have a place in the bigger story, and God and God's truth is over all of them. So they serve a purpose. Plus they're fun.
Well, there is that too. So and you can see Christians throughout the ages doing this exact sort of thing. There's the approach, you mentioned this to me earlier, where you could picture the missionary stumbling up to the tribe of Irish Celts.
The Picts.
The Picts, yeah, they're all painted blue, they're all getting ready for war. Guys, Everything you've ever believed is wrong. Let me tell you why.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to be the most effective way. So you see what a lot of them did was like, okay, let's find some stuff that you have. Let's figure out a way to incorporate the Christian truth into it, where you'll see a lot of sort of pagan residual stuff in a lot of our Christian celebrations. That shows a lot of people in the past who were really doing the hard work wrestling with this stuff. So related to that, let's talk a little bit about Irish mythology, because Irish mythology is not quite as well behaved as like Roman, Norse, a lot of other mythologies. One of the things I like about like Greek mythology is it's very, okay, this god is in charge of this god is in charge of this, and it's very orderly. Things are a lot more mixed up and sort of running free in Ireland, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that comes especially from the oral storytelling tradition. The Dagda, who is the main god of the Irish pantheon. Like suddenly that word.
You almost said Parthenon, didn't you?
Pantheon. Yeah. There it is. He is either this all-knowing God, all-powerful God, or he is a father who is concerned for his son and not able to help him. It all depends upon the story.
Yeah.
It all, so the Celtic gods serve the story and the storyteller. So, the storyteller could be anybody. Mm-hmm. So they could have their own purpose for telling that story. And so they could have the gods behave in a way that they wanted them to. And, in my story, I took liberties with the story, because the story of Brigid's Cloak is kind of 2 sentences. This happened. So, you can see as a storyteller, well, you got to take liberties. You got to make it interesting. And so that's where all of this, comes down, these differing aspects of the same characters.
Yeah. Let's look at one of the liberties you took that I found really, really interesting. And that was the decision to make the point of view character the king. What made you decide to tell the story through his eyes? Because
he's the one with the most to lose. Mm-hmm. You always want to go with the one who's the most to lose. And I'm thinking about the story and thinking about the bridge between pagan tradition and Christian faith. I was like, well, who does this matter to? Who stands to lose? The king is going to lose power. He could lose, the strength to defend his people. He could lose resources. And like I said, they're one famine away from the end, from his people dying. And so it matters. His decisions matter. And so that's why, and then I wanted him to be able to see, the power that's over everything. So that's why he's the interesting character in the story. So
he also has the character arc, Brigid, she's pretty sad.
Does.
She's pretty sad.
Yeah, she stays the course from childhood. Well, and that's another thing that we talked about, and I don't know how you're going to bring that up, but Brigid the saint consistently serves the poor, which is something that Christianity brought to so many cultures. The idea of taking care of the vulnerable, taking care of the weak, taking care of the poor. And that from, every single story about Brigid pretty much includes her giving wealth away, giving and taking care of. And so that's, I think, an important aspect of why her character became central in the Church of Ireland and in, the way that they would pass on their tradition is.
Like you said, the idea of caring for poor people, which is something that's absolutely ubiquitous today. Like nobody would actually admit, I don't care about poor people. I have money. I'm more important. But that was pretty much the defined view of humanity until, I'm sure we could find it, small pockets, some places, but basically until Christianity gets introduced, where you're having to see this idea is like, no, the gods just don't like, wealth and power and money and stuff. Mm-hmm. They actually want you to care for people and, want you to like love him and stuff.
Totally foreign.
Totally
because,
foreign.
For the king of Leinster, in real life, he was later killed by a member of his own family. And, anybody who knows history know that wasn't that uncommon.
Yeah, you don't really want to be the king back then.
You don't want to be and you don't want to lose any sort of edge. You don't want to lose any strength. So he had a lot to lose.
Yeah, and you can see this in a lot of other literature, like Norse literature, like Anglo-Saxon literature of this time, during the same sort of thing, where Christianity is being introduced, and it sort of has a foothold, but not entirely, and people are just trying to wrestle with it. Like you can see with the Norse, with the ideas of like, hey, if my relative gets murdered, I need to murder that guy back. You know, there's sort of clan loyalty. There's this ideal of the warrior, which doesn't always fit the best. And you see them trying to
they're
fit it together.
Crammed in, like Beowulf, you know, faith is crammed into this epic story that's been around longer. And it's not always seamless, but it's interesting. It's really interesting, and it has value for us to look at and see sort of the roots of, you know, this murky faith as our faith is growing in the first century.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it's a human thing to do. It's the sort of thing that I think all of us in this world where we take so much to grant can still grapple with, where there's always this temptation to be like, okay, yes, Jesus, okay, cool, but maybe just to be safe, you know, Thor's pretty awesome too.
Yeah, superheroes.
I mean, Odin, you know, there we go.
Yeah, head to the beds.
Yeah, you'll see, like I've heard they found like archaeological sites where people will be buried with like a cross on one side of their tomb and like Thor's hammer on the other side of the tomb, just sort of like hedging their bets, in which we can say what we want about that. You can understand why someone would want to do that, especially back then.
Well, and it speaks to the power of story.
Yeah.
You know, it captures the imagination, and there is truth beneath the symbolism, beneath, you know, just the words. And so, yeah, I think it's always about unpacking that and going deeper rather than just staying on that surface. Well, of course there weren't, you know, there wasn't a goddess this, there, you know, there wasn't this, that, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, my temptation with all of these really old saints accounts my first lens is, did that really happen? And that's exactly the wrong way to approach it.
Well, and, you know, to be honest, mine too.
Yeah.
And, you know, that takes a lot to admit because you're the outline person. I got to bring it in. And I'm the like, oh, let's play around and let's see where this story goes. But still, like, you read these things and you're like, no, that didn't happen. You have to take out that modern viewpoint and dig deeper and find out, you know, the root of the story.
Yeah, and really one of the things that I find so fascinating about Brigid is how so much of this is bound into one whole cloth. You know, it's not like there's, oh, here's pagan Brigid, here's Christian Brigid, here's historical Brigid. It's all one thing. Like you can see this with some of the traditions about her that continue to this day, right? There's, you know these better, like the Eternal Flame, there's other stuff. Tell us about the stuff that's still going on with Brigid.
Oh, so the Eternal Flame is really exciting. That's like, it's in Kildare. And it had been burning continuously. This is something that Brigid and her sisters, and then the Brigantine sisters after that, guarded the flame. And then it was put out in the Reformation.
Some overzealous Protestants.
Yeah.
Let's all just sit with that for a second.
Yes.
So there's a couple things to unpack there. First off, there are pagan roots there because, you know, keeping an eternal, you know, sacred fire going, that's something that has roots in a lot of different societies worldwide. I'm sure it had roots in like the ancient Celtic land too. But second, there's an actual place with an actual flame. And it still actually exists.
Well, it does. It has been relit.
Oh, good. Can't really call it the Eternal Flame anymore, but...
Yes, the Eternal Flame since the Reformation. Yeah. But there's also a tree there where people, you know, Brigid's tree right by a well, and they come and they hang trinkets and they pray. And there's something special about that I think that we, you know, have to stop and pay attention to, because going to some place and being in the presence really of so many saints before, and really saints coming after you. You know, we talk about, in the Celts, we talk about thin places a lot. You know, places where eternity bleeds over into reality. And I think that there is extreme meaning in being in a place, and we have those places here in America too. Maybe they're not quite as old, but you know, you can still go places and you know, you have that feeling of history and the people who've come before, and it links you to the church, that links you to the saints throughout the ages, and that's powerful. That, you know, people gathering and praying fervently for the ones that they love. You know, I think that echoes down through our experience and those to come.
Yeah, exactly. That captures what we were talking about earlier, where regardless of this particular tree or any particular Brigid, like that is totally beside the point. We know that this particular tree has had faithful Christians for centuries coming there, sincerely bringing their petitions to God there, and you can be joined as part of that. And that is something that goes so far beyond, just the surface level stuff that we so often get hung up on.
Yeah. I want to name a rock band any particular Brigid.
Well, there's at least 2 Brigids we need to keep track of, right? There's Christian Brigid and Goddess Brigid. But that actually leads me to another thing that I segue to another thing I wanted to talk about. That's Irish Christianity, and how I find Irish Christianity absolutely fascinating, because early on in Christianity, a lot of the big bishops grew up around cities, because grew up in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean was built around big important cities, and that just made sense. But when they get to Ireland, they don't have cities. They're painting themselves blue and going to war with each other. So the bishop model based in a city just doesn't make sense. So what grew up were a lot of monasteries and convents, where the abbot or the abbess would be the de facto spiritual leader of the entire region. So I just find that fascinating, where someone like Brigid, as an abbess, was probably in the position of being the spiritual leader in her region.
She is, called the mother of the Gaels, the Mary of the Gaels. So that's a high honor to afford.
Being compared to the mother of God, yes, that is quite the honor.
Yes, but yeah, as opposed to, a faith tradition that talks about people in power, like, I'm just thinking of Constantine and, did this and that. And here you have abbots and monks who give away power and serve in small ways and serve, small but necessary needs. And I think the Irish faith tradition, so revolves around home, hearth, seasons, planting, prayers for, laying the hearth in the morning, prayers for, covering it at night, and all of those things. And it just is it's such a homely, in the best kind of sense of the word, a homely and personal faith.
Yeah, and you can see sort of that continuation there from, in one sense, it's continuing from like the pagan past, where a lot of these pagan deities, they grew up over real concerns that real people had. Like you mentioned earlier, if we have one bad harvest, me and my family all starve to death. If that band of warriors decides to come from that town to this town, we're all gonna die. Like all this stuff going on totally beyond your control. That's gonna lead you to look somewhere else for something. And then you can see how a lot of this mythology can spring up. And then once Christianity comes, you can see how, like you said, you sort of weave this into the church's life. It is very based on just the rotation of, things like the harvest, which were very important. So yeah, you can see both things going on.
Yeah, both traditions kind of blending together. And, really people, the care of people. Like Brigid's was important to her, the care of people, which is why she wanted to build the monastery. And just that slight tweak in history from pagan to faith is fascinating and echoes down, and all the things that are part of our tradition now, especially as Anglicans. We had a discussion about, Anglicans really kind of mirror the Irish tradition in a lot of ways.
We like the ancient Irish church. It's sort of our jam. But and some other things about Brigid, it's just good. We're running a little low on time, but just to close on that, again, how absolutely world-altering, just turning the world on its head, this Christian message of, you need to care for the poor. Oh, no, your slave matters just as much as you do. Sorry. Oh, you need to respect everyone. That's just so foreign. And you can see, even in the story, the king's sort of grappling with this, trying to grapple with the fact that, setting aside some of my land for poor people, that matters?
Yeah.
And also, I find it fascinating with Brigid's birth. I think there's different stories here, but she's illegitimate, to use a non-swear word version. She is a bastard child of some...
Yes.
So.
Well, and born, there's another legend about her that she was born on a threshold.
Yeah.
And I think that beautifully encapsulates that pagan and faith. She's born on the threshold, and I tried to kind of allude to that change. And then also she, like we said, she was the saint of the brewery, and she did supposedly turn water into beer. So that's
I think
what
that's part's probably
I think
factual.
I have to include
Yeah.
that on a pub night.
Yeah.
You know, I think that felt important.
That is important.
Slip that in at the end. And beer.
And let me also say that St. Brigid's Day is celebrated February 1st.
Right, Imbolc.
Is that an Irish thing?
Yes, that's the pagan, the holiday Imbolc is February 1st. And it's like the beginning of spring.
Wow.
But it's funny because February 1st is cold. I know. And you're like, are you sure? But it's such a hopeful, it's like spring is coming. And I think that that's so meaningful.
That is very hopeful. I don't think I could have that attitude of hope on February 1st. But something I could do on February 1st, the convent that Brigid got, from the story of the Cloak.
Founded, yeah.
Founded.
Kildare.
Yes, thank you. This is why it's good to have Evangeline there. I speak in broad generalities. She has all the facts there. But the convent that Brigid founded at Kildare is famous for its blueberry production. So it's a tradition on St. Brigid's Day to eat some blueberry jam in her honor.
Right. Oh, and you said it was called, what do they call it? Biddy's Day.
I think.
So like St. Patty's Day.
It's Biddy's
Day.
I think.
So next year we propose Biddy's Day celebration.
Built around blueberries and beer.
But also you have to tell the story of Columba. And the Loch Ness Monster.
Ooh, don't think I haven't started that already. All right, well, Evangeline, thank you so much. I really loved your story. It's so great to be here. So with that, we're going to take a brief intermission for all of you people in attendance, get some more food, get ready for the music. And for all of you listening on the podcast, thank you all again. And I forgot to announce something. No? Okay, good, I didn't. For all you people listening on the podcast, thank you for listening and see you next time.
And there you have it. I super enjoyed that conversation with Evangeline and listening to her story. And I am super, super glad that we're doing the pub nights again. We will be doing them pretty much every month for the rest of the year. So if you are either in the Colorado Springs area, or if you will be at some point during the year, please check out the times of our pub nights, either on our website or our various social media channels. Seriously, look into getting a ticket. We would love to have you there. And as you can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Customers are trundling home, the fire is down to embers, and you've polished off your final glass. Believe to See is brought to you by the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.